He had spent his entire life believing that money could explain everything: motives, actions, even people. Yet nothing prepared him for the moment he stepped out of that polished marble hotel lobby and saw a young girl sprinting away with his wallet clutched tightly in her hand. It happened too fast for logic, too sudden for reason. One moment, he was adjusting his car. The next, he was chasing a stranger through a crowded urban street, lit with bright afternoon sunlight. Despite being a billionaire, he was not used to running after anyone, but something about this girl, her frantic footsteps, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, the unmistakable fear in her posture pulled him deeper than the theft itself. People on the sidewalk turned their heads, some with curiosity, others with judgment, as if already choosing a side before knowing a thing. The girl slipped into narrow alleys, weaving through parked bicycles and crates, moving not like a thief, but like someone escaping a world that had cornered her too many times. He felt irritation surging at first, but it shifted uncomfortably into a strange sense of unease that he couldn't explain, because as he closed the distance, he noticed something he wasn't expecting. She wasn't running with greed, she was running with desperation, and deep down, he already sensed that whatever reason she had for taking that wallet was going to shatter the image he had of her, and of himself. He slowed his pace when he saw her stumble near the end of the alley, her breath shaking, her hands trembling so hard that the wallet slipped from her grip and fell onto the cracked pavement. But instead of grabbing it, or even looking back, she pressed herself against the wall as if bracing for impact, as if expecting him or someone to hurt her. It was that reaction, that flinch born not from guilt but from experience, that forced him to a stop. He found himself standing only a few feet away, the echo of the chase fading behind them. The city noise filtered back into his awareness, the rumble of distant engines, a vendor calling out prices, footsteps moving somewhere beyond the tight corridor. But here, in this narrow forgotten space, everything felt strangely still. The girl didn't move. She held herself rigid, like someone who had learned long ago that staying silent and small was safer than explaining anything. Her clothes were old and dust-stained, her shoes nearly worn through. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, almost like she was fighting to remain upright. He reached for the wallet, not out of anger anymore, but curiosity. It wasn't heavy in his hand, its weight hadn't changed, but he had. A shift had begun, subtle yet undeniable. He opened it not because he feared the loss of money, but because something felt off. The cash was untouched, his cards were still there, but behind them, tucked carefully into a hidden slot, was a small scrap of paper that he didn't recognize, a scribbled address, a date, and a name, Lena. He looked up at the girl again. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were focused on the ground, on nothing, on everything she feared all at once. Her shoulders shook subtly, the kind of tremble that comes from exhaustion layered over hunger, layered over days of trying to survive a life that offered no mercy. He glanced at the address again. It was barely 10 blocks from here somewhere, in the older part of the city. Not a place someone like him would ever visit. But why was her name hidden in his wallet? How long had that note been there? Had she taken the wallet only to return it? Or had she targeted him specifically for some reason he didn't yet understand? As he studied her, other details emerged. The faint marks on her wrist, the way she favored one leg when standing, the bruising just beneath the sleeve of her shirt, half faded but unmistakable. These weren't signs of a petty thief. These were the quiet signatures of someone living through the kind of struggles people like him only heard about in documentaries or charity pitches. And for the first time, he wondered if he had completely misunderstood the situation. Still, he remained cautious. Wealth had taught him that desperation could be dangerous. But humanity, something he rarely needed in the business world, was demanding space now. He stepped closer, gently placing the wallet on the ground so she could see it clearly. She flinched again, but not out of aggression, more like someone who had no reason to trust a stranger with polished shoes and expensive intentions. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He simply watched, observed, tried to understand. It became clear that she wasn't planning an escape anymore. She was simply trying to survive a moment she expected to end badly. Minutes passed, though they felt heavier than time should allow, and during that silence, he realized that the story of a stolen wallet was unraveling into something much bigger, something rooted in the kind of injustice that doesn't always scream, it whispers, it hides, it buries itself inside the lives of those who have never been given a fair chance. Finally, she took a slow, hesitant breath, her voice barely audible though she didn't dare raise her chin. "I didn't want your money," she whispered, almost as if confessing to herself. He didn't reply, not with words. The truth was, he didn't know what to say. He had spent a lifetime commanding boardrooms with confidence, yet here, with a trembling girl in a forgotten alley, he felt stripped of control, forced to confront a side of the world he rarely acknowledged. Her eyes flicked toward the paper in his hand, the note with her name. Her face tightened, not with shame but with fear, as if the secret she had tried so desperately to protect had been exposed. And just like that, he understood. She hadn't stolen his wallet for money. She had taken it to retrieve the note she had hidden inside, the only clue to a place, or a person, or a past. That terrified her as much as it tied her to something she couldn't escape. The weight of this realization settled around him. He knew now that their lives had collided for a reason far deeper than theft. He didn't know her story yet, but whatever it was, it carried a darkness so heavy that even a billionaire with all his influence, power, and privilege would struggle to comprehend it. And without knowing why, he felt responsible for uncovering the truth. He stood there, holding the note between his fingers, realizing its significance was far greater than the wallet itself. The girl, Lina, kept her eyes fixed on the ground, as if waiting for him to accuse her, shout at her, drag her somewhere she did not want to go. But he remained still, almost afraid that any movement would shatter the fragile moment, balancing between fear and revelation. The city noise outside the alley continued, indifferent to what was unfolding here. Cars honked. Someone argued across the street. A bus exhaled as it pulled to a stop. Yet none of that touched the quiet tension between them. It felt like a pocket of the world had been carved out, just for this encounter, place where truths waited to surface. After a long silence, Lina's breathing steadied, just enough for her to lift her head slightly, not fully just enough for her eyes to meet the paper in his hand. And in that brief glance, he caught something, a flicker of grief mixed with a certain resignation, as if she already knew she was out of time. She took a step back, not to run, but to create distance between herself and whatever secrets that address represented. For the first time, he wondered if she was more afraid of going back than of him. He turned the paper over again. It wasn't just an address. There was a date written beneath the name, a date that had already passed, and then another name crossed out beneath it. Someone she couldn't reach anymore. Someone who wasn't alive anymore. Suddenly, the situation sharpened into something far more painful than he had imagined. This wasn't a thief standing in front of him. This was someone who had lost more than she could carry. He took a slow breath and slipped the paper back into the wallet, placing it gently on the ground again, closer to her this time. But instead of fleeing, Lina stared at it like it was a chain pulling her back to a place she desperately wanted to escape. He stayed quiet. The story she wasn't telling yet was louder than any words could be. Then, carefully, she crouched to pick up the wallet, not to run with it, not to hide it. She simply held it against her chest, her fingers pressing tightly into the leather, her shoulders curling inward as if protecting something fragile inside herself. And without looking at him, she began walking out of the alley, not fast, not abruptly, but with the slow resignation of someone caught between survival and surrender. Her steps were heavier now, each one dragging a weight far greater than a stolen wallet. He followed at a distance, surprised by his own decision. He wasn't chasing her anymore. He was following a story he didn't understand, one he suddenly felt compelled to see through. The streets they moved through were different from the polished parts of the city he knew. Buildings leaned into each other from age. Windows were cracked or covered with cardboard. Children played with sticks instead of toys. An old woman sat on her doorstep, watching the world pass with tired eyes. This wasn't a place built for people like him, but it was the place where Lina lived her life. She kept moving until she reached a bus stop. Broken bench, faded sign, rusting metal frame. She sat at the edge, holding the wallet in both hands, still not looking at him, even though she knew he had followed her. For a moment, her eyes drifted to the sky as if asking a question she'd asked too many times before. Why me? Why always me? Then she lowered them and stared at the ground, her thoughts tightening around her like invisible ropes. He didn't sit beside her. He stood near the sign, giving her the space she seemed to need, but not enough to walk away from the truth forming behind her silence. Minutes passed before she finally spoke, again her voice faint, flat, and carrying the hollow sound of someone too tired to pretend anymore. "It wasn't yours I wanted," she said, though she didn't lift her head. It was the address, and the letter inside. Her words confirmed what he already suspected. but hearing them made the situation feel heavier, more human, more heartbreaking. He remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I put it there," she said slowly, as if dragging each memory from a place she'd buried. "A long time ago, before I disappeared." Her fingers tightened on the wallet. She looked small sitting there, dwarfed by the world, carrying wounds that had shaped her more deeply than anyone could see. "I wasn't supposed to leave," she whispered, "but I did, and he didn't survive long after." He didn't know who he was, but the grief in her voice made it clear that this person had mattered, someone she failed to return to, someone she couldn't save. She took a shaky breath and finally looked at him, not with defiance, but with the tired acceptance of someone expecting to be judged. "I didn't steal to hurt you," she said. "I just needed to know what was left behind." If anything, her words sank deep into him, unraveling pieces he didn't know were loose. The arrogance he carried, the certainty that the world was simple and people fit neatly into categories: criminals, beggars, thieves, victims, began to crumble. He realized she wasn't running because she was guilty. She was running because she knew the world wasn't kind to someone like her. A girl from a forgotten neighborhood, a girl whose skin color made her a suspect before she even spoke, a girl who had lived too long under the shadow of loss and fear. He softened his tone as he finally spoke, not to interrogate, but to understand. "You came back for the note?" She nodded slowly. "And the address?" "I had to see it again," she said, "even if it hurt." There was something powerful in her confession, something raw, something that challenged his perception more than any boardroom debate ever could. He understood now why she ran, why she trembled, why she flinched at every movement. She had learned long ago what people like him could do, what they believed, how quickly they assumed the worst of her. But instead of fear now, he felt something unexpected. Responsibility, not forced, but chosen. A need to stay, to witness, to help her find whatever truth she had chased into his wallet. She stood up slowly, glancing at the bus approaching the stop. Its brakes squealed, doors creaking open. The air smelled of diesel and dust. She stepped forward, ready to board, but paused. For the first time, she looked at him with something other than fear. Not trust, but not fear. A middle ground. A question. A silent plea. He didn't know what she wanted from him, not yet. But he knew this wasn't the end of their story. This was only the beginning of the truth. The bus hissed as its doors stood open, waiting for passengers who already knew where their lives were heading. But Lena remained at the edge of the step, frozen between two worlds, the one trying to swallow her whole, and the one she wasn't sure she deserved to walk into. She turned slightly, her eyes settling on him with a heaviness that carried more truth than anything she had said so far. The quiet question in her gaze lingered in the air, a plea for something she didn't yet know how to ask. And then, as if the weight was too much to hold any longer, she stepped away from the bus. The doors closed with a metallic thud, the vehicle pulling off with a groan, leaving the two of them alone under the harsh afternoon light. He didn't move or speak. He simply watched, waiting for what came next. Lena clutched the wallet close, the leather pressed against her ribs like a shield. The address inside it had dragged her through memories she had tried desperately to outrun. Now those memories seemed to rise around her, pressing into her lungs, threatening to consume her. "Can you come with me?" she finally asked, her voice trembling not from fear, but from vulnerability. It was the first time she had chosen to trust him even a little. It was also the first time he realized that whatever she was about to face, she could not face it alone. He nodded. Together, they walked toward the older part of the city. The streets narrowed, the buildings grew darker, stained by years of hardship. The road cracked beneath their feet, lined with the remnants of once busy shops. It was a neighborhood forgotten by everyone except those forced to live in its shadows. Lena led him through a series of turns, until they arrived at a small building with broken windows and a rusted metal door. It wasn't abandoned, it simply had no reason to be noticed. She stopped in front of it, her fingers trembling as she reached for the handle, but she didn't open it. Instead, she closed her eyes, breathing slowly, trying to gather the strength to confront what waited inside. "This is where I grew up," she whispered, "and where everything ended." He felt the gravity of her words, the stark contrast between her world and his. His childhood had been filled with privilege, safety, certainty. Hers had been built on fear, loss, and survival. Finally, she pushed the door open. Inside was a dim, dusty room. A collapsed table, scattered papers, a broken chair, and in the far corner an old mattress, its fabric torn, springs jutting out like exposed wounds. Lena walked toward it with slow, deliberate steps. "This is where my little brother used to sleep," she said, her voice cracking as she knelt beside the mattress. "Before he got sick, he stayed near the doorway, giving her space but not leaving her alone. He was only 8, she continued, too young to understand why the world treated us differently, too young to understand why people crossed the street when they saw us, too young to know that we were trapped in a neighborhood no one cared to fix." Her hands trembled as she pulled out the paper from the wallet, the note she had hidden long ago. She placed it gently on the mattress, like a tribute. "I ran away," she whispered. "I thought if I left, I could find a better place for both of us. Somewhere safer, somewhere he wouldn't be judged for the color of his skin, somewhere we could start over." Her breath caught as tears slid silently down her cheeks. "But I didn't make it in time." He felt the truth like a punch to his chest. "He died the same week I left," she said. "I didn't even know until months later. And when I came back, everything was gone. Our home, our things, even his photos." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, but the tears kept falling. "The only thing left was this note," she continued. "The address where he was last taken, the address I wrote so I wouldn't forget, even though it tore me apart." And then she said the words that pulled him fully into her world. "I put it in your wallet because I was scared someone would take it from me. I didn't trust anyone, not even myself. And then, everything happened so fast, I ran before I could get it back." He moved closer now, not to comfort her with touch, she wasn't ready for that, but to let her know he was here, present, listening. She stood slowly, turning to him with eyes filled with pain so deep it carried years of injustice. "People think girls like me are just trouble," she said. "They see my skin and make assumptions. They see my clothes and decide my story. They see me run and think I'm guilty." She took a shaking breath. "But no one asks why." Her words pierced him, because he had been just like those people, quick to judge, quicker to assume. Despite all his success, all his influence, he had never taken the time to understand the world she survived every day. Then she said something he knew would stay with him forever. "I didn't lose his photos because of poverty," she whispered. "I lost them because the world decided our lives weren't worth remembering." He felt something shift inside him, as if the foundation of his beliefs had cracked. He had seen injustice in articles and documentaries, but never this close, never through the trembling voice of someone who had lived it. He realized now that this wasn't merely her story. It was the story of countless others buried beneath society's indifference, overlooked because their lives didn't fit neatly into narratives people wanted to hear. Slowly, Lena folded the note and placed it back into the wallet. When she turned to him again, her expression held a mixture of grief and fragile hope. "I'm tired of running," she said, and for the first time he understood. This was the moment everything changed, the moment her truth shattered his assumptions, the moment he stepped into a world he had never been forced to see. The climax of their story wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was the quiet unveiling of a truth that demanded to be seen, and now that he had seen it, he knew he could never walk away unchanged. The room settled into a heavy stillness, as if even the dust paused to listen. Lena stood there, fragile yet unbroken, carrying the weight of a childhood that had demanded too much and given too little. He watched her, realizing that everything he thought he understood about life, justice, and humanity had been reshaped by the truths. She had finally allowed herself to speak. For the first time since the chase began, she looked like she wasn't running anymore, not from him, not from the past, not from the grief that had haunted every breath since the day she lost her brother. She exhaled shakily. "There's nothing left here," she whispered, "just pieces of a life that never got the chance to become whole." He stepped forward just enough for his presence to reach her without overwhelming her. The silence between them turned softer, less of a divide, more of a bridge. "No one should have to face this alone," he said quietly, the words carrying an honesty he wasn't used to exposing. Lena didn't respond immediately. She walked slowly through the room, her fingers lightly brushing the peeling paint of the walls, tracing memories etched into every corner. She paused by the window where sunlight filtered through cracks, casting broken beams across the floor. "This place took everything from us," she murmured. "Every dream, every chance, every safety we were supposed to have." Her voice held no anger, just exhaustion, a lifetime of fighting to stay afloat in a world determined to pull her under. He watched her shoulders rise and fall with each breath, the weight of years settling and lifting at once. Something inside him shifted, something he had never felt for anyone outside his sheltered world. A responsibility not born from guilt, but from an awakening. He realized how blind privilege had made him, how easy it was to overlook the suffering woven into the streets he never walked, the lives society chose not to see, and now that he had witnessed it through her eyes, he couldn't pretend it didn't exist. She turned back to him, her expression softer, the walls around her finally showing cracks big enough for light to pass through. "What happens now?" she asked, almost as if she didn't expect an answer. He didn't have a plan, not one built on business strategies or numbers or control. What he had was something simpler and far more powerful. "You choose," he said, "where you want to go, what you want to do, and I'll help you get there." She blinked, startled by the sincerity in his voice. Not pity, not charity, not condescension, just a promise to stand beside her as she rebuilt what life had taken. But she shook her head gently. "You don't owe me anything. I took your wallet." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You didn't take from me," he said. "You reminded me of the world outside my own, of the people who survive without the safety I take for granted. If anything, I owe you for opening my eyes." Her breath caught, confusion mixing with fragile hope. She wasn't used to being believed. She wasn't used to being seen at all. She turned away, wiping the last of her tears. "I just want to find something better," she whispered. "A place where I'm not judged before I even speak. A place where my brother would have been safe." Her voice trembled. "A place where I can start again." He nodded slowly. "Then let's start with today." They left the building together, closing the rusted door behind them. The sunlight outside felt different, now warmer, gentler, no longer indifferent to her presence. For the first time since the chase began, Lena's steps were steady, not hurried, not frightened, just steady. She walked beside him, not ahead, not behind. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she wasn't walking alone. As they moved deeper into the city, the contrasts between their worlds felt less like walls and more like threads weaving toward something new. She told him about the shelter she once thought of going to, the community center she had heard about but never trusted, the skills she wished she had learned but never had the chance to. And he listened, truly listened. He didn't offer solutions disguised as pity. He didn't interrupt with assumptions. He didn't reduce her story to statistics, hardships, or labels. He heard her as a human being, a rare gift she wasn't accustomed to receiving. They stopped at a quiet corner near a small park. Children played on rusted swings. A mother pushed a stroller along a cracked path. For a moment, Lena watched them, her eyes softening as a hint of longing surfaced. "This is the kind of life he deserved," she whispered. "He deserved more than what the world gave him," he replied. They stood in silence. And then, gently, she handed him the wallet. "Take it," she said. "I don't need it anymore." He accepted it, though something in her gesture felt less like returning an object and more like releasing a burden she had carried far too long. "What I need," she continued, "is a chance to make my brother proud." And in that moment, the impact of everything they had lived through, every assumption broken, every truth revealed, crystallized into a new beginning. He looked at her, no longer seeing a thief, or a stranger, or a girl from the wrong side of the city. He saw resilience, he saw courage, he saw a life that deserved every opportunity the world had denied her. And he made a decision, one that would change both their lives. "I'll help you," he said. "Not because you ran into my world, but because now I see yours." A breeze shifted through the trees, carrying the echoes of a story that had begun with suspicion and fear but ended with something far stronger, understanding. Lena took a deep breath, letting hope settle into spaces long occupied by pain. For the first time, her path didn't look like an escape, it looked like a future. The final takeaway. Sometimes the greatest transformations happen not through confrontation, but through understanding. Sometimes the people we fear the most are the ones carrying the heaviest stories, and sometimes a single moment of compassion can rewrite an entire life. Reflective question for audience. If you witnessed someone running not from guilt, but from pain, would you chase their mistakes, or try to understand their story?